it's not always going to be this way. It's not even necessarily true. Like, yeah, we're through a month of data and we're through a month of information where, yes, Emerald Seal has clearly been the successor in the format, which is great. But it also doesn't mean that, like, you can't figure it out. You can't work towards other goals. You can't find ways to play against the matchup to better your odds in it.
There's a lot of things in life, it's stepping stones. You gotta, level up, and that takes time. And part of that, and staying motivated and excited about doing that is just like seeing yourself actually like start to succeed more or have like more accomplishments.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that the formality of them putting it there was just saying, like, hey, we acknowledge that if at some point we really mess something up, that we can have this.
If you think you already have mastered your deck and you have the ability to play other decks or you have the cards, I think it's definitely worth it to like you said, like go and play like blue red or sapphire steel or whatever it is, because it just gives you an idea of how those deck play. I think it's just valuable to play other decks so you understand how your deck beats them too.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Forbidden Mountain today. I have a very special guest. It is none other than Brian the Rat Courtade, the winner of DLC Chicago. How are you doing this evening, sir?
I'm doing great.
It's good to hear. We're a few weeks removed from Chicago, so I'm sure it definitely is all settled in at this point. But, you go into your locals recently, if you've played in any other tournaments or anything like that, like, what has been the vibe like for you kind of walking into your local buildings?
Yeah, no, it's been interesting. A lot of congratulations. A lot of my friends locally who I played other games with, I've played games for a long time, are excited to play. It's awesome to see. Um, I did have a situation at my locals after Chicago where I sat down to play someone who was new. Shout outs to Andrew, and he uh, was talking to me, and he was like, "Yeah, no one was here last week for locals. I guess everyone was in Chicago." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah." And then we played, and he was like, "Wow, like." He was playing red purple, and I was playing green steel. He's like that, like like wasn't even close. And someone's like, "Well, you're playing the person who just won," and he was like, "What?" And then he was like, "It's an honor to play at this store," and I was like, "Hell yeah!"
Nice.
So
Yeah,
I mean, it's it's been cool. It's been fun.
that's cool. How is, like, the Michigan area for Lorcana?
So I live in West Michigan. Most
Okay.
people who you'll see from tournaments live in probably like the east side of the state, like Detroit. They have a lot of like 1Ks and stuff over here. We don't have as many. We have a lot of local game stores. I mean, we're a strong, I think the Midwest in general, just like because of the snow and stuff, people like I think gravitate towards like this type of activity during like
Sure.
the colder months or whatever. And yeah, like right now it's the summer, so like attendance is even down in locals. Like you can just see, how it works. But I think for like the Midwest, like we're a pretty solid area overall. And we've had like one of my friends who just started playing is from this area, came in second at Worlds in Yu-Gi-Oh. So we have like kind of like a longer history of at least card games on this side of the state as well.
Hmm,
But yeah.
that's good. Um, a lot of things happen over the course of the last couple weeks. Not anything obviously to the scale of a DLC tournament, but we've had other tournaments show up. Definitely overseas. There's been a couple that have been like close to 100. This past weekend, we had an event in Atlanta, well, in the area of Atlanta. Ironically, again, that was about 164 players. And through those events, you're seeing these kind of evolutions of the metagame in itself. And I kind of wanted to pick your brain about this past weekend in the 10K, the fifth seed here, and then your deck here is on our left from the winning deck of DLC Chicago. You can see that there's very interesting choices between these two lists. So, from your point of view, from Chicago to now, have you really adapted any new cards to your particular list that as you're approaching set championships?
Not really.
Okay.
I'm thinking about taking out a Baboom for the second Zeus, which you've seen some people do. Maybe
Mhm.
going down on Bruno's, which you've also seen people do. Like for instance, Zan also
Yep.
did well last weekend. And his list is a double Zeus, no Bruno build, no
Yeah.
Baboom. I think that he plays the two big tinks for the two Flynn one drops.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's 54 cards that are set, and you can choose the other six. I mean, go for it. I think the list here on the right is it's pretty
It has
spicy.
some very interesting choices, right? Like the one of Under the Sea, the I'll Find 'em. I can't actually remember the name of that song off the top of my head. The Crickies, these are two Avalanche. Like, I think that's probably just a testament to the mirror match, right? Like if the Cove is now a staple in all these decks for Emerald Steel, then like maybe playing Avalanche is a solid mirror breaker now.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't think that card's very good.
Okay.
Um, I don't know if I'd run it, but I think in general, one of the things about this meta is that it's really hard to be good against everything.
Yeah.
And it's like the second that you start putting in cards for the mirror, you get worse versus red blue, like and in general, like uninkable tech cards are just kind of rough.
Okay.
Um so like, my concern with playing a deck that's too teched out is that you kind of just like execute your main game plan less
Mhm.
often or less efficiently. And like into something like set champs and not a DLC, I think you're more likely to see like some rogue decks,
Right.
and like those cards can really actually like slow you down in those matchups, and they're like marginal where you might want them. Like you don't want to have like, even though Avalanche deals one to all like the units or whatever, uh characters, like you don't necessarily want to have that against someone who's just like flopping down characters that don't have one health or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of weak to that. Uh, I don't know how the card like that would help the red purple matchup. I think the red purple matchup's already really good. That list in particular was down to 2 Raging Fire, which is also a good card versus red purple. But for me, the set champs, like I'm particularly happy with green steel's positioning because I think red purple is the cheapest deck and it's very popular,
Yeah.
especially where I'm from.
It's I think it's like a $600 difference. So yeah, there's a good chance that if budget is at all a factor, in the set championship season here, then
I mean, the reality is that budget is a factor. Like,
yeah,
like at a
sure,
set champs, like to some people it might not be, you or me, whoever takes the game very serious, but like
sure,
a lot of people I know at least are interested in playing, and like locals is like whatever. But they're definitely going to be at like set champs.
right,
Like that's an opportunity to win an Ursula or whatever for them. And that people love the mats as well. And the event's fun.
yeah,
As cool as, I mean, I go to locals. I try to go to locals every week. I think it's important to support your local scene, and kind of like it growing is where it all starts. But at the end of the day, like people have kids and they have lives, and I think I seen a poll recently where they had people answer it, and it's like the majority of the people playing are, it seems like above 25, like 25 to like 40.
it's really weird. It's
Um,
like twice in a week that I have to talk about analytics, but even for me, who can see analytics on on YouTube as an example,
mhm.
the average player is between 25 and 34 or 35 and 44. So like
That makes sense
below
to me
that is almost an anomaly to the game.
because younger people play digital stuff. I mean, not
Right,
just like digital card games, but just
right,
whatever it is, Fortnite.
yeah,
Like
which
this
is
is like the
crazy.
first new, and well, other than One Piece, which is like wildly played
Well, like there's
in
One
person.
Piece, Digimon, and Flesh and Blood that all kind of came out around similar to the
Yeah.
same timeline. Obviously, One Piece is the most successful of those.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I would say that this is the first like post pandemic, right? Because all the Flesh and Blood and Digimon came out in the pandemic, I believe, like right, like almost in the heart of it. Um, and then I believe One Piece, I think it was maybe they're like 10 sets in or something like that.
I
So
don't know the exact.
yeah, I think they're like ten
They're not 10
sets.
sets in yet. I
No,
don't
not
think.
10, not yet.
No, the
Okay,
new
all right,
one just came out, or the
okay,
pre-release was last weekend. I tried
okay.
to play
Maybe it's
one
not that.
actually.
So I don't know. Maybe they're like a year ahead of Lorcana.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But in general, like, yeah, I'm just not surprised that that's what your demographic's
Yeah,
saying.
it's
And
just it's funny to think that that's like you and I mean I don't want to speak for you, but like for me, like when I was in high school, like I went to F&M every night, like every Friday. It was like yeah, that's what I did in high school. It was my Friday night thing. So
there was a point where I was at my locals. I've been playing since I was 11,
Yeah.
and there was a point where I was like 17 at my locals, and I was like talking smack to somebody, and I was like, I was I think more cocky as a kid, but I was
Yeah.
talking smack to this guy, and I was like, I'll never be playing card games in 10 years.
Oh.
And every time I like start a new game, I just think about how dumb I was.
Yeah.
Uh,
Very, very fair. That's funny. Um, in one of your interviews, you actually touched on playing in levels, uh,
mhm,
and I thought it was interesting the way that you had stated it. It's like if you're a newer player, and you show up and you're like, oh, like I'm going to go to the DLC, and then you do
mhm.
poorly, it's not to say that it's like as expected, but you should probably not be as hard on yourself, right? So with set championships coming up and that being this opportunity for local players to go from league play to, like one step up to these set championships, how important do you think for the certain levels of players to be successful in set championships to kind of like want to grow competitively in the game?
No, I think it's huge. I mean, like, going to like I was saying, going to locals was one thing, but like set champs is, I mean, for what we have now, it's that next level up.
Yeah,
People come from a little bit out of the region. Like, I'm not gonna go to a locals that's an hour away, but I'll go to a set champs that's an hour away, right?
right.
So for people around me, uh, they won't see me. Some of the people at these stores, like I'll only see them during set champs, and in that way, it's like you can really feel that like regionality. It's almost like a state championship type deal, even though you don't get everyone in one place.
Yeah,
Um, we'll see what the future holds. I mean, I'd love that. Some people think like geographically organized tournaments or whatever are kind of like a thing of the past, but um,
I think
if
they
you've
still
seen
have
the
to.
clip, I think you understand. Like, I just think that it's a cooler like when you play a digital game, like what the deal is. Like I'm gold 5. There's people who are grandmaster.
Mhm.
There's people who are in top 100 grandmaster. Like at the end of the day, back when I was younger, if I wanted to get better, I had to learn from the guy at my store.
Yeah.
Like, I couldn't go to YouTube. I couldn't like think
Yep.
about all these people that I may never meet, or whatever, or
Yeah.
engage with much. Like, it was about me learning from the best player in my area.
Yeah, even just social media in general. Like now we have Discord, we have Twitter, like we have all these additional accesses of information to
Hmm.
like just like bounce an idea, like us
Yep.
being like us talking from Philadelphia to Michigan here, like
Hmm.
it didn't exist when we were in our teenage years, right? Like it was just like,
Yeah.
yeah, like that guy that you talked to, and even to this conversation, like for me, I had a guy named Conrad, and Conrad like top 8 at nationals the one year, and he played at my F&M, and I'm like, well,
Hmm.
that's a guy I play against every week. Like that's the guy that I want to be in the room with. I want to get better because of that guy, So
Hmm.
for you now, for Lorcana, that's kind of what you're doing for your local community. They're like, oh, like this is a guy, like this is a guy I play with every week that's successful in the game. Like he's now the official bar for this area.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just it's nice to have goals that seem achievable, and when you're playing on a ladder, it's very easy to see yourself in a position where you might never be able to like be as good as the people at the top because you play a lot and you don't move up or whatever it is. And I just think that like there's a lot of things in life, it's stepping stones. You gotta level up, and that takes time. And part of that, and staying motivated and excited about doing that is just like seeing yourself actually like start to succeed more or have like more accomplishments. And like you aren't always going to be able to do that just by throwing yourself in the deep end like
Yeah.
over and over and over. So I think it's just nice to have uh, different levels of competition.
Before we move on to the next subject, I kind of want to set a ground for you as like a player in general. You have a background in online gaming. What are some of those games that you had played in before that you would say that you maybe not necessarily like top edge line professional, but played in a professional manner?
Yeah. Professional is an interesting word.
Sure.
Like the reality is for Hearthstone, there was enough viewers that like, I got paid monthly, not very much, but my travel was covered and I got to
Mhm.
go see the world. Like unbelievable opportunity of a lifetime. Even with Magic and some of these other games where a PT might be somewhere or whatever, it's not the same as like what it was like in Hearthstone. Like
Mhm.
I got to go to Sweden 6 times. Like I
Wow.
went to China. You know, um, like all around the world, Amsterdam, like you name it.
That's
I
cool.
played in tournaments like everywhere.
It's
And
kind of funny to say that you did that for an online game, you know?
yeah, yeah. Most people only their experience of Hearthstone is playing on the ladder by themselves against someone they'll never meet, and
Right.
that's the entire game experience.
Right.
And I actually talked a lot about that because I came from a traditional card background when I started playing Hearthstone. Just like the difference, there's a lot of differences in how the community develops, how the meta develops. The access to data. I mean, the list just goes on and on. But yeah. So other than Hearthstone, I on for digital games, I played League of Legends.
Right.
So like in season one, preseason one, so I was on a team called Rock Solid, which was like the team that
Okay.
eventually becomes Dignitas for season one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like Skara, Voyboy, them. I played with them back then. So that was like a pretty high level. And then prior to that, I played just like Warcraft 3 custom games.
Okay.
I played this card game online, G Tunes. Have you ever heard of it?
I don't know that one.
It was a Cartoon Network card game,
Okay.
and, like, it actually had IP, like, Batman, Superman, all of that, so, like,
Okay. Okay. That's
there was, like,
interesting.
9 spaces, 5 in the front row, 4 in the back,
Okay.
4 in the front, 5 in the back, 5 and 5, 10. I don't know, but then you have, like, a deck of 12 cards, basically, and, like, like, if Scooby Doo was placed next to Scrappy Doo, then he'd gain, like, 10 extra points.
Right.
That type of thing. And then like the opponent could play cards to negate your cards and stuff. So I played that actually for like
Okay.
a couple years when I was younger.
So I asked that question because there's been a topic that kind of started recently about the healthiness of Disney
Mm.
Lorcana in the first month of the game. Emerald Steel very much out and a far away, kind of winning the race currently. But it's not necessarily about, I would say, the power of the deck, but essentially the feeling that it leaves your opponent in games. So I like for me, if we were to go back to set two and we talked about the power that Ruby Amethyst had and the consistency that that deck created, I think it's a little bit different then than it is now with Bucky and Diablo and Aladdin and Flynn and just like Jafar and like it's just the amount of like consistent success of removing your opponent's resources before they could ever use them, um, and doing it far faster and earlier than like a Ruby Amethyst control could in a previous metagame. So the first question I have for you is how do you feel about the health of Lorcana currently?
Yeah. Um yeah, so background in card games, I played different card games for like 20 years. I guess
Yeah.
it's like more of a card game question, although like a meta exists in every game. I think you touched on one thing in particular, which is you said it depends on how people feel.
Right.
And I'm not saying that like I don't necessarily agree with everyone about, should Bucky be banned and
Mhm.
like what the reality is of Green Steel's win rate. Obviously, in that meta cut, it looks dominant, but a lot of people think that Red Blue, beats it. There's people who say that Green Steel is like the worst of the top 3 decks or, whatever. These are just opinions that are held. So, um, in general, I just think that like the like regardless of what the reality is, like how people feel is more important to the success of the game, how I'm interacting with the game, how other people are interacting in the game. Maybe not like what I'm choosing to play or what I think is best in a tournament, but like I don't want people to be unhappy when I play them either. Um, you know. So one thing is like green, the identity of green in the game is discard.
Mhm.
Like some people don't think that discard is a fun mechanic. This
Right.
is not like a new topic. Like
No.
in Hearthstone, there were plenty of cards that got printed where people are like, like this is crosses the line for me because it does something that I think that like isn't fun, or it's not something that the game should do or
Right.
have in it. It's interesting. I mean, with time, like I think that you could balance and fix any problem.
Right.
So like regardless if there's an issue right now, I'm sure they'll figure it out in the
Mhm.
next chapter. I know that chapters are already designed, but they can go back and add stuff or change stuff or whatever. So in the card reveals, they revealed like the Elsa. That's card's insane at killing Diablo, obviously. A 3/3 evasive with rush out of red.
Yeah.
Another card great at killing Diablo.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Did they choose these cards on purpose? Who knows? But
Right. Right.
it gives you some
Hope.
insight into kind of like the ability to balance the cards by just releasing new cards. Now, for this meta, I think that uh, I preferred the last set meta. I thought that that meta was one of the best metas I've ever played in any card game, point blank, period.
Agree.
I was kind of down on Chicago. I did well in Atlanta, but I didn't do as well as I wanted, and I felt like that was like the best opportunity. And I had been doing well prior. I mean, I won the pack, um, doing well in online weeklies.
Yeah.
But so I do think that maybe this meta is a little bit whatever you say feels less good,
Sure.
um, or is maybe less skillful. But overall, I think that the skill in Lorcana is actually really high,
Yeah.
and I think that if you look at the people who are topping all of the events, whether it's in person or it was online, like there's a lot of consistency actually,
Yeah.
um, and that's a good indicator. Like in a different game, I don't know if I go to 5 set champs and just rattle off like 5 stitches,
Right.
or some people won 6 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Like I went to local tournaments in Hearthstone and I was really good at that game, and there's people who beat me. And some of the metas in that game, people like hate, or
Yeah.
we're a lot worse than this. I can tell you that.
Right.
Just not even to complain. That's just the reality. So I actually think that overall the meta, like in the win rates and all of that's fine, but the main question still is like, is discard an unfun mechanic, and should it be one of the best decks, or should it be some like should it be they try to keep it like a tier 2
Right.
type strategy or whatever, so that people who enjoy it like it. And you know it's like you said, people like to play. They don't like when you take their cards from them. Like part of the game is like seeing ahead and being like, okay, well, I'm gonna do this on 1, this on 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm gonna ink this, and I'm gonna do that. But then it's like, what was I even thinking? Like, I was gonna lose my Medusa before I ever played it. I was
Right.
never gonna get to be prepared because like they were gonna take it out of my hand, and like whether or not I developed this card on turn 2 or 1 was irrelevant because I actually just needed cards in my hand so
Hmm.
I could eventually be prep on like turn 7, which is like, it's like you got to understand your macro game plan going into the matchup, like red purple versus green steel, not necessarily like think about it from turn to turn, because like then you'll just trap yourself and get your get your hand discarded, and then you'll be like even more upset about it. But people just want to be able to do what they plan,
Right.
and like this stops them from doing that. So I mean, I understand the frustration for sure, um, with that. But there's always something to complain about, and I think that if the green steel wasn't around, people would, be harping about Hiram, or
Yep.
whatever it is.
Absolutely
Um,
agree.
Even right now, like I know Hiram, you'd be like, oh well, hyper aggro takes out red blue, or whatever it is, but it's like whatever decks or whatever's happening to red blue, like if you take green steel out of the meta or whatever, like all of a sudden they become better against those decks that beat it. And like I just think that Hiram's a fantastic card, and Popsicle. Um, so all the not all the colors, but some of the colors got some pretty nice cards. I mean, even like set 1, purple had draw, no one else had draw. Rapunzel's been unbelievable for most of the game's history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. The reason I asked about the background is in the game they have set a precedent that like there could be a ban list, but coming from online, there's a lot of what is called an errata or like a hot fix if we really want to like just compare it for like a League of Legends or something like that. Like just some
I
like
mean, even
patch.
for Hearthstone, they'll just update the card
Right,
text.
right. So
Like
like
they
they'll
don't
literally
consider
just
it an errata, but
they'll just
yeah.
rewrite the card as like what it does.
hmm
Uh, my question to you is, do you think that that is a logical answer in the game?
For an in-person card game, I don't think that errating is an answer. I think that you reserve that for when like a card isn't worded as intended or it's not working as intended because you maybe messed up the wording.
Right,
Um, or like, I don't know if you call it an errata, but like they had to misprint
right.
cards for like or the Peter Pan with an extra bracket and we took it out. Like technically
Sure.
that's an errata, but and they
Yeah.
actually start printing the card with the correct thing. But I think in general, like you just want to stay away from that. Like just keep the cards, as they are and try not to change them. And as far as the ban list, I I know that's in the rules, and I
Yeah.
expect them to maybe eventually do a ban list.
Right.
And I could be wrong about this, but what that signals to me is that they're not intending to have a rotation.
Okay.
It's possible that they intend to both have a rotation and a ban list, but when I think of a ban list, I just came from Yu-Gi-Oh! That's why I played for like 12 years of my life. So
Mhm.
when I think of a ban list, I think about a card pool that doesn't actually rotate. And
Right.
then one of the ways that you move, the meta forward is by doing a ban list.
I wasn't sure if you just heard that giant sound, but it was loud.
Yeah,
I was
I
like, "What
did.
the hell was that?" It scared me. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that the formality of them putting it there was just saying like, "Hey, we acknowledge that if at some point we really mess something up, that we can have this." Uh, but I always find the conversations around like, oh, if Bucky didn't just have this, or if Diablo didn't just have that, or if it was like one stat different, like there's always these interesting conversations that come up, and I don't think people understand how difficult it is to sit down at a table and for a new player to came in that just bought all their cards online and they saw that they saw what it is, they bought their cards and they came in, they play their deck, and you're like, that card actually doesn't do what it says on the
Yeah.
paper there,
I
I
mean,
have played in games where like literally I call back to World of Warcraft. There was a promo in World of Warcraft that
okay.
came out and it was like the card that you went and picked it up, and I'm not kidding, the entire text box was different. Like the online
Yeah.
website would show you a text box that had
Which
nothing
card
to
was it?
do.
I played some
It
more.
was the it was a promo card from like one of the Christmas sets.
Okay.
Wintervale Disguise Kit,
Mhm.
I think that's what it was. But it was just like in the card, it said something about being like resistance against fire types. And then like that was not at all what the card did online. You were like it wasn't even the right
Mhm.
card. It was like what happened
Mhm.
here,
I mean, they do erratas in Yu-Gi-Oh.
Right. Okay.
I mean, not like aggressively like a
Yeah.
Hearthstone change, but it
Right. Right.
happens.
Right. Like yeah, like you said, in an online client like Hearthstone, they can just be like, oh, Moonfire doesn't do what Moonfire does anymore.
Yeah,
It's
Bucky
completely
no
different
longer
card.
has a ward. They can just
Right.
do that in
Like,
that
you
type of
just be like,
game.
"Oh, you know what? Remove Bucky's ward. Oh, you know what? Remove Inkable." Like,
Mhm.
you can do anything. So I think it's an interesting conversation when people are like, "Oh, just remove this." And it's like, "Okay, how do we do that? Like, how do
What's the
we
card that people most would have wanted banned before this set?
this set?" Um, I would say like a card like A Whole New World, Be Prepared, Font.
Everyone's gonna say whole new world.
Yeah,
Everyone, basically. I mean, you could say like be prepared because it's Dark
sure.
Hole or
I don't think it would ever
Wrath
be
of
correct.
God, but like a lot of people are gonna say whole new world because
Yeah.
wheels and magic. This card can get sung. This card clearly seems unbelievable.
Mhm.
And the fourth thing is that it's no different than Bucky. You set up your plays, you have a plan, and then it just all gets thrown to the wind.
Yeah.
And basically, in the first three sets, there's like if you play a red purple mirror, which was a lot of games, there's
Mhm.
a lot of like nuance to the resources going on. But then you play against someone playing like Amber Steel, and it's like when they're low on cards, you can't be like, okay, they're low on cards, so now I'm going to take advantage of the fact that they're low on cards, and that's my avenue towards winning because at like any point they can just rip it, and next thing you know, they're like back in the game.
Yeah.
And like that existed. I think obviously, I think red purple was a dominant deck, but I actually enjoyed the mirror. I think it was skillful, and I think even with like the whole new world existing or whatever, there was still like plenty of skill and good things going on in the game. But like it's no surprise that that card comes up because it still makes you discard your whole hand, and it
Yeah,
basically invalidates one of the key ways that people interact with card games, which is resource management.
right. Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation. I think that I think you had said it yourself. You enjoyed the last metagame so well that I think many did for many different reasons, but at the very like minimal of it is that there was probably 8, 9, 10 decks that on any given day you can win a Lorcana challenge. I mean, the deck that won Atlanta was not a deck that anyone really had
Hmm.
predicted that was going to, right? So,
Yeah,
it,
the another thing is like the power level disparity between like all 60 cards in your deck was lower than it
yeah.
is now. Meaning like my 60th card in the current format is much worse than my first card, like
Oh,
in an
yeah.
average game.
Yeah.
Like Robin Hood, or let's say like in my deck list, Flynn one drop. It's just the actual card itself compared to like Diablo. It's unbelievable. Where like
Yeah. Yeah.
and another thing, and I know that's a one drop, so it's a bad, like,
No, yeah.
example or
No, but
whatever,
still.
but, like, in general, it's just like, Minnie Mouse, like the 1/3 in red purple, it's only so much worse than, like I get that it's worse than, like, a rabbit, but it's only, like, so
Right.
much worse in a sense where it's like, clearly, like, power cards, Diablo, Hiram. I mean, Hiram's been around, but how it works in the red blue deck now, yeah, I mean, you said be prepared, people want it banned. I mean, that's just another power card, but I think like overall they've done a pretty good job balancing the game, and a lot of things have counters.
Yeah.
And I said this on another podcast, but like, there's no reason they can't start printing things that make it so that when you set in chill, your opponent gets to choose what they discard, and they discard a card that actually gives them a positive effect
Right.
all of a sudden. And
Yeah.
then
Especially
it's
because,
like, whoa, sudden chill's unplayable. We
yeah.
can't use that ever again. And
Yeah. Especially because I pretty much all the cards except for bare necessities, like your opponent gets to choose what they're discarding.
hmm
So you're like,
hmm
oh, I'll just yeah, I'll just lightning bolt. I'm like,
Yeah,
cool.
there's like this card in there's this effects in Yu-Gi-Oh called Dark Worlds, and like one of them is like when they're discarded, and it's like when your opponent discards and you get to choose it. It's like, like you're just like super excited. I mean, there's cards like that in Magic too that have
Yeah,
effects
yeah.
when they're discarded. Like come to the board. I can't think of the one right now. It's green, but
Thoughtseize
yeah.
is always the one that comes to mind.
I had to take a card for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Um,
Or duress,
it,
which is basically bare necessities.
hmm
Yeah, yeah. It would be interesting. It's there's nothing to say that it can't just be changed. I mean, I think dramatically we've seen it happen with every set. Well, I'd say like with the last two sets more specifically is that you've seen these true developments in other archetypes.
hmm
In set one, Emerald arguably was almost unplayable for the majority of it. In set two, it was also really close to unplayable. In set three, it finally got there. In set four, it's like, oh, okay, now we've just gotten enough powerful cards. They're like, wow, all right, like I get it now.
Yep, yep, for sure.
And it's funny because it really doesn't take that many. Like in set three, it was like both of the Ursulas. And it was like, man, that's good enough to make this like a potential choice, a contender. It removes a problem that the deck has, and it creates a threat that pressures the game.
I think another thing about like the last green or Emerald Steel deck that people like, Prince John is a card that gets payoff for discard. When
Yeah,
you go up against it, you feel like, okay, well it's weak, it's 1/2. It can't lure because it's susceptible to getting attacked. Yeah, it has ward, and but like discard hadn't been good yet. So it's just like it's kind of like, oh, they're playing like this niche card that rewards discard, where it's like now the green steel deck, people are just like, oh, it's like, Bucky was bad and now he's good, and every Floodborn they play is good, and Diablo is like an unbelievable
yeah,
card. Like it's just good. It's not like good because you decided to play Sudden Chill with it.
no,
It's just good.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
just like there's definitely a critical mass of good cards. I mean, that's reflected in the cost of the deck.
yeah,
Like 16 of the cards cost $800
yeah. The deck being
or
pretty much.
700.
I mean, I think like the this weekend the most expensive deck was the Emerald Steel deck was like $828. Like
Yeah, and
that's
Beast is like $60. 4 Beast, that's 240. 4 Robin Hood, that's 400.
yeah,
4 Ursulas, that's 120. And
yeah,
then 4 Diablos is like another 240. So it's like, yeah, you're at like $700
Yeah, like
in a
you're
row.
just like 16 cards in my deck, and yeah, it's it's not great either, right? Like if that is like the boogeyman, going into like these set championship conversations of just like the boogeyman, you're like you're on a budget and you come in, you're just like, man, I
I mean, the thing
literally
about it is, I don't think it's hard to beat green steel with
no,
cheaper decks, but the problem is that whatever you're doing to beat them is going to make it way harder for you to beat red purple and red blue, or just
right,
red blue and not red purple. But like the type of decks that the big four are and how they sit, it's just hard to tech for two at once.
right, right. Which is interesting. We can move on a little bit here and talk about the that matchup concept of kind of getting from point A to point B in a tournament. Now you've played in best of three tournaments in Lorcana. We now have had two DLCs of the 2 game format. A couple of the pack events were also 2 game format. So you've had your experience now playing in these long 8-9 round tournaments of the 2 game format. How are you feeling about that in comparison to best two of three, and like how does that kind of change how you approach the deck choice?
Yeah. Um, I prefer the best of three to the best of two. I mean, it's math, but I understand that some people can't play as fast, this type of thing. So, this is ultimately what they decided to do. So, get on board.
Right.
Um, there's definitely a lot of differences. I think one thing that people don't focus enough when it comes to the 2 game format is that like it kind of changed it so that decks have to be good on both the play and the draw. So people started thinking more about those types of lines differently. Like, with my green steel deck on the draw versus red blue, if they use a quill and I have like sudden chill Ursula 3, Ursula 2, they're going to lose their hand every time.
Right.
Versus if I'm on the play, it's not going to go down like that because they're going to have the extra card. So their extra card that they don't discard is B prep, and now you're getting B prepped or whatever. Like there's a lot that changes being on the play versus being on the draw. And since you you're gonna be on each one instead of, potentially, like, if you're winning, you're more likely to be on the draw more often because it's a 50-50, and then if you won, you're gonna be on whatever your worst side is, assuming your, opponent's making the right decision. Like that it's just a very different. So, like, right off the bat, I think that that was like a blow to something. I mean, obviously still doing well, but like red purple. I think the purple decks in particular, I mean that red purple list is like very good on the play compared to the draw. You have the Flynn. The Flynn just we're literally talking about the Flynn in some percentage of games that's probably decently high, just gets 3 lore because you were on the play. Versus if you're
Yeah.
on the draw, it just doesn't. Like if
Right.
I go Diablo 1 drop, Ursula 2 drop, and you're on the play, your Flynn got 3 lore. On the draw, I mean, I'm on the draw. If I'm on the play, I resolve a 3 drop that has 2 attack, and all of a sudden, now you're not gaining 3 lore on your turn, and you get to play the 3 drop Sisu. I already have an Ursula resolved, and that's like
Yeah.
Raging Fire comes down, and that's the end of your board. So it's like you didn't even get to capitalize on the lore there. So I think like in general, people are already like building their decks to be like better on both sides. Like cards like Baboom, I mean, you just see it, and like those kind of cards weren't really sneaking in during best of three. Um, and in general, just like being an aggressive deck, if you have a 50-50 to win game one, because you think you just always win on the play, which I don't think is like how the game works, but it's how some people think about it.
Sure.
Then if you lose, you're on the draw, you lose, you get to go on the play again. But like that's not good enough. Like winning one of two isn't good enough to get it done in
Right.
the 2 game format DLCs. Like you got to 2-0 people.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the two is like you need to hit at minimum 5 of them to like be in a position to even be in top 64. So
Yep.
when you look at like I have to 2-0 more than half of my rounds. And you have to, I agree. You have to like
Like, you can't
really,
afford for your deck to be bad on the draw. It's
yeah, I
unacceptable.
agree. It's very interesting. How do you feel about like this? To me, this is kind of very weird to me. Is like they're very focused on DLCs being the 2 game format, with the top cut being best of three, but like set championships are they're on the packet. They're being incentivized to be best of three. To me, wouldn't this be a good opportunity for like to get everybody on board with the 2 game format?
Yeah, I mean the problem with that is just that the 2 game format. only works when you have a high number of participants. I mean, I don't say only works, but it works best when you have a high number of rounds and a high number of participants. If you decide to do a 2 game format for like the local chat champs and some store only has 14 people,
Right.
like the experience is super bad in my
That's very
opinion.
fair.
It's
Um,
like weird. It's like I won 1-2-0 and then I won another one 2-0 and then I went 1-1 and 1-1 and actually like 19 of it's like all like it's like like 7 of the 13 of us have the same point total or something
right.
ridiculous,
Right.
and it's just
Right.
like, okay, well only 4 of you are going to get a stitch, and that's like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's just weird. It's just a it's it,
Well,
it's not good to be on the bubble and then not make it at a big tournament, but like the feeling of like having probably and like I would have to run sims, but and I don't know. I'm just like guessing, but like I'm the person who comes in, like if it's cut to top 8 and it's 16-person and it's a 2 game format, like I could see a possibility of like 8th place having the same points as like 3 people who didn't make it or whatever, 2 people who
yeah.
didn't make it, and that feels like you're gonna feel horrible.
Yeah, I think the worst tournaments in set champs for me were the tournaments that were 15 or lower, and they were cut to a top four, but it was always 5 people that were three
If
one.
you lose more than one, you're done. It's
Well, that's what I'm saying, but there was always at least one extra person that's X1, and that person in fifth place normally gets knocked out on like third tiebreaker because of how tiny the tournament is. It's like
Mhm.
that doesn't feel good either. You're like,
Exactly. I mean, it's the same problem. I
yeah,
mean, like, could you solve it? Like, yeah, you could definitely solve it. Like,
sure.
you could run 2 games if you want to. Like, you just overrun your rounds. So if you have 16 people, you just run it
You would just run an extra,
5 rounds or
yeah, you
something.
would run an extra round of
You
Swiss.
can
Yeah,
run
which
two
is
extra rounds if you really want to. It
right.
doesn't change anything. Like,
Yeah,
it
I
just decreases
actually
the reliability of the results. But it takes longer. People don't have that much time to set aside. Like, not everyone's as serious about at the end of the day, like going to a tournament and playing is a product. And like people are
mhm,
paying for that product and that experience. And to people that are serious, and it's all about like, oh, who won, who's playing the best. And not that like it's not that for some people, but like,
sure.
like you have to strike a balance.
Yeah.
And like I know from my experience at my locals that there was definitely a problem with finishing 3 games in the allotted time limit.
Oh, yeah, I totally
And
agree.
that did not feel good to anybody involved. I mean, I think I went to time once ever, and so for me, it's not as big of a deal. Or even if I did, I wouldn't be bothered by it. But I can see how for other people, they feel like there should be some kind of like conclusion or finality within a match.
I think in that world where the current rules are, it just the game just ends at a draw. I would much rather it be treated how the top cut works. If you have a time top cut, it goes to a
Hmm.
tiebreaker. I think that like the game should just go to that in general. Like it, I don't really care who is benefited in this. If the aggro deck is benefit, like great, like whatever. Like then the aggro deck can be benefited. But I do think that the unintentional draw in like any game I've ever played is always like the worst feeling. So
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I don't mind the 2 game. I mean, it's not like the reality is just like mathematically it's less reliable to determine who the best player is than like if you had the time to do like a best of 3 Swiss with the same number of rounds, or they only do 9 rounds, where like for that number of people, if you did a Swiss tournament, it
yeah,
would. And I know that like they say like, okay, well it's 2 games, so it's actually 18 rounds, and I understand, but
yeah,
like
yeah,
at the end of the day, like there's a tournament structure. You can do the math on like the reliability if somebody has a certain win rate that they end up making top cut or whatever, if they're that a certain win rate type player. And the reality is just that best of 2 is going to produce less reliable results. But the question is if they're reliable enough, and if it helps the tournament in other ways. So, and I think in that way it does. I mean, I personally don't think that the play draw is as bad as they think. I mean, I think in this format you're actually favored in the green steel mirror on the draw.
mm,
I don't think that's even that like hot of a take anymore.
mm.
But it's just to say like they were trying to solve a community sentiment problem about the play draw, uh, and they did manage to do that. So
I agree. They just diverted the conversation, right?
yeah.
So We're coming up on set champs, coming up on Fort Worth. You just came off, a win in Chicago, and
Hmm.
my final question for you this evening is staying motivated. How do you set a goal for yourself to win a DLC, and then accomplish said goal, and then stay motivated to do whatever the next goal is?
Yeah, I mean, I think for for me, I'm just kind of obsessed with the game. It's like, you're like, there was a tournament last weekend. I'm like, bro, I watched the tournament on Saturday. I
Yeah,
watched the one on Sunday. Like, I'm looking at the deck list. I have two of the deck lists I thought were interesting already built to play with. Like, I'm constantly, even when I say I'm like playing less, I mean, everyone's playing less because of Pixel Board.
right.
I'm still like engaging with the game at least, I tried to for like an hour a day. Um, but I think for me, the thing that's keeping me motivated is I just like love the game. I think if you don't love the game, like you should just go do something else. Like, yeah, I mean, that's just kind of where I'm at. The It's really easy to get down on yourself or on results, but like there's a lot of randomness in the game. Like I was down, even though I did well in Atlanta, I still gotta let it go. Like, you know, I
Yeah,
I wanted to do better, and it's easy to be negative about that. And the person I traveled with, like I talked to them, and I was like, I don't think that chapter four is going to be as good of a format. So like, the chance of me winning in Chicago is a lot lower than it was here in Atlanta.
yeah,
Yeah, but then I won in Chicago. Um, it's a combination of luck and skill, but and picking the right deck and all of that. But I think like you just got to be in it for the right reasons. Like if you're in a position where oh, I got to play Lorcana because I signed up for this tournament and I'm going to go to this tournament and I don't really like it right now and this and that. It's like on some level, like you might as well just ship it already because like you're competing against people who are just as smart, good, whatever, and they also like
are
are
committed.
having a positive mentality and prepping and taking it all whatever and like yeah you can still go and win and do well. I mean anyone can, like
Yeah,
even if you're that's the beauty of card games and open tournaments. It doesn't matter if you're a big name or not, you can still go there and on that day like do well and be the person who wins or gets prizing or top 64 whatever your goal is. um yeah, just uh do things you love and then it's not as hard to stay motivated.
it's very, 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 very nice words, actually. And it's the truth. I think that this like conversation of unhealthy game state, and like just discard being this like dark cloud on the game, and people are like, oh, I don't really want to play because of that. It's like, all right, listen, it's not always going to be this way. It's not even necessarily true. Like, yeah, we're through a month of data, and we're through a month of information where, yes, Emerald Seal has clearly been the successor in the format, which is great. But it also doesn't mean that, like, you can't figure it out. You can't work towards other goals. You can't find ways to play against the matchup to better your odds in it. Even this past weekend, we saw Ruby Amethyst beat Emerald Steel on stream twice, like not once, twice. Like it did happen. Like it proved that some of the better players in the room have the ability to just completely alter how they play that matchup and then go, okay, I figured out a way to give myself a chance.
Hmm.
I don't know that those things happen if you're not motivated to play the game, you know?
Yeah, I mean, once you sit down to play, like you already like decided you were gonna play, so like why does it matter if the meta is bad? And on some level, right? Like you've already got the cards, you've already said you like the game, you're already going to a tournament. Like why like salt the experience for you? And like I guess like for me, maybe I felt differently before, but like after playing Hearthstone, like a couple things. One, like people were really good at Hearthstone. Like yeah, I played professionally, but I was like a bad professional player in the grand scheme of things. Like
Sure.
seriously. And you know part of it is the amount of time that everyone got to dedicate and just like yeah, I mean just some crazy players. But I guess like in Hearthstone there's like other formats, last year standing, conquest, etc. And sometimes you have to bring four decks in conquest or last hero. So like last hero standing is like every time you win with the deck you don't have to play it anymore.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
basically like you could win with like three of your four. You could have to bring five decks. One gets banned. You have four left. You have to win with all 4, and, like, your opponent might have a lineup that just beats Mage, and Mage is in year 4. And, like, you might win with the other 3 and then lose 4 games with the Mage.
You just never
Because,
win.
like, the matchup spreads with your Mage are, like, 90-10,
Wow.
like,
Okay.
horrible. Like,
Yeah.
people just know the macro game plan and, like, you're gonna lose.
Huh.
And, like, you have to know that, like, that 10% that exists, you have to know how to get there,
Yeah.
like, very, very well. And,
Or you
like,
have to
that's just the
create
reality.
50%. You have to create 20%, you know?
Yeah, against certain players, you might be
Sure.
able to, but, like,
Sure.
when you're playing against, like, all the best people in the world, it's like, for instance, like, I use the red purple example, like, and people are running Maleficent 3 because they just wanna keep their hands full so that you can't get to their be prepared while they can still slow down your tempo, right? Like, that's the whole goal. Like, if you watch red purple players, they're keeping, like, rabbit or whatever against green steel, like, they want to get more cards in their hand so that they can't get their hand discarded, so that they have a chance to be prepared on 7, and that's, like, one of the main ways they win. Like, you gotta know if you're playing red purple, you gotta know how to do that.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna be in that matchup and you need to know how to get there. And even if it's 10, 15%, like, you already decided to play your deck, you already decided to play the game, like, get over that and how, like, broken Bucky is and
Yeah, yeah.
or whatever, and, like, you gotta be able to get to that 10%. So, in Hearthstone, that's, like, a huge thing, like,
Yeah.
because you have to play 4 decks. You don't get to choose the best deck that has a good matchups against everything. You're probably gonna have to bring a deck if the format is enough decks, like, sometimes it's 3 or it's 3 ban 1, and then you get to bring, like, 3 good decks or good decks. But, like, this is a known like, a huge problem because 'cause it'd be like, what's your the 4th deck problem, they'd call it, because like, the 4th deck you bring might be, like, super targetable or, like, super weak,
Yeah.
and, like, there was only 3 good decks in the format or whatever. So it's just, like, that idea of, like, you're in a match and it's already hopeless from the beginning is, like, something that happens all the time in that game. So
Yeah. Interesting. One quick tip for players heading into set champs.
My quick tip for players heading into set champs would be to play something that they're comfortable with, honestly, and also look at your local meta and think of, you might be driving further away, but within, like, wherever you're going, like, think about who the best players are and who you might play and what they play. And, just remember, even after you make top 8, you got to win one more match. So you're
My
going to play
God,
someone
like the
good in top
worst,
8.
the
So,
worst
like,
top 8 game ever. Actually, I guess DLC Chicago was probably a worse top 8. You were playing for the difference of a
well,
Mickey
I got to
moment.
play against a red purple player, so I was happy about it.
Oh, I
But
see. I see.
but yeah, no, I mean, for a lot of people, it's a lot of pressure. That wouldn't have been the first time I lost like 20K in a match. So
Sure.
it was the first time I won 20K in a match, but yeah, not the
There
first
you
time I
go.
would have lost 20K. Yeah, you get enough chances, and eventually you either win because you get lucky or whatever. But yeah, I mean, just plan for your local meta and play a deck you're comfortable with, and don't stress too much about if you don't have access to, like, green steel or whatever it is. Like, red purple is the cheapest deck, and if you go into a field of people who play red blue, like, you're super well positioned no matter how good they are.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, I mean, that'd be my main piece. Just stick to what you know, and tech whatever your deck is for what you think your meta is going to be. But if you do have, like, an insane read and you normally play something else and you want to just go do something else, like, if you're just defining, like, writing down and defining your, like, local meta, like, for
Yeah.
my local store, like, someone could literally sit down and be like, okay, Brian's going to be there, he's green steel, so and so's going to be there, he's this,
Mhm.
she's going to be there and she plays amber steel, and they're going to be there and they play this, and then you look at it and you're like, oh, it turns out that, like, even though
Sure.
I don't have green steel, red purple is a great deck.
Yeah, yeah. Like, statistically speaking, I can just eliminate the room and go, well, if these 3 people are my worst matchup, it means that as long as I don't play all 3 of them in Swiss, I can make top 8 and then give myself a 50-50 chance of winning an Ursula.
Yeah, or you can say, like, everyone else I'm going to play is only going to be so good because these are the best players, and
Right.
I'm going to have to beat them to win. So I should actually worry more about beating them than, like, beating these other people.
Right.
And I think
Uh,
that's a lot of the reason why people bring red blue is because it just, they think it beats green steel
yeah, sure. I mean, yeah,
or blue steel.
it's a comfortability thing of like, oh, if if I don't want to lose to that, I should play the deck that I think is best positioned into it.
Yeah, and then if someone comes with a rogue deck like hyper aggro, hopefully they're only so good and you're able to, use your skill to beat them.
Right.
And if you get cooked, you get cooked. I mean, that's just
Yeah.
how it goes.
You get cooked and you finish in fifth place, and there's another one tomorrow.
Hopefully, you got to stay positive, especially since there's 4 weeks of games
Yeah.
potentially if you're not going to Dallas, and like it's gonna be totally different experience because I think people will be like, well, last week I played this, but then I really think I should have played this, and I think yeah, I mean over the course of the 4 weeks, I would say like if you see your meta is different than you thought, and switch your decks, but like try to stick to the same deck and try to like play well
So it's
and get
interesting.
better throughout the weeks.
I think it's a little too late for this piece of information to help anyone, but since we know set champs are coming up, since you know that you know the local meta game and things like that, and you're really just playing for that local meta game, how important is it in the prior weeks to play different decks? Like, so if you come into one tournament on Saturday and the majority of that tournament's going to the same tournament on Sunday,
Hmm.
and your initial call for the meta is like wrong, you're like, oh man, like there has to be some comfortable thought there to going, I can go and play this other deck, but if I don't have any games on it, I might make mistakes. Like
Hmm.
this time during June would have been a great time at leagues to try other stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, I tried some other stuff. I think in general, you got to be like if you bring green steel, just be confident that you like that's a deck only deck you've played. Like I would just say stick with it and try to tech it, and then win throughout the 4 weeks, even if the meta is whatever. But for someone like me, I think that I've already played green steel a decent amount, and I'm like pretty sufficient on it. So I was spending time doing either trying to find a new deck, which I think is like kind of like a huge time commitment.
Yes.
So I don't usually like I'm not usually the one trying to find a new deck. I'm like more like, okay, that deck looks good. I'm gonna try it or it looks interesting. So like, I built Towel Man Purple's deck because I thought it was interesting. Um, but like I think if you just stick to your one deck and grind it out, that's probably like your best shot. If you think you already have mastered your deck and you have the ability to play other decks or you have the cards, I think it's definitely worth it to like you said, like go and play like blue red or sapphire steel or whatever it is, because it
Yeah,
just gives you an idea of how those deck play. I think it's just valuable to play other decks so you understand how your deck beats them too.
I agree. Yeah. 3 weeks removed from DLC Chicago. What did the win mean to you?
It was the biggest win in my 20 years of playing card games. It's no, I mean it means a lot. I think I still like they're they're doing a different trophy, so they're sending me the trophy.
Oh,
And I
thank
think like
God.
when I put
I
the
didn't like the
trophy
trophy, man. I'm just being honest. I was like, oh, that's like, oh,
yeah, we won't talk about it, but I think when they send me the trophy and I like put it on my shelf and stuff, I feel like
yeah,
even more like it's real. But yeah, I mean it was wild. It was a wild weekend for me. It was a lot of payoff. Like I played a lot of Lorcana this year. Um because there's a combination of things. I love the game, but I also thought the opportunity to win was really good right now. And I know like the game's just getting started, like more and more players who are really good are coming to the game.
yeah.
Not to say that people playing aren't good now, but just more players. That's
More
just how it
players
goes.
always breeds more potential. Harder
Hmm.
competition,
Hmm.
etc.
And I'm just, yeah, I'm thrilled it happened, and I'm excited to play in the next one. And I'm happy that it kind of like, invigorated some people I know to start playing because I just enjoy playing with friends. So
Nothing better than gaming with your friends, right? We've been doing it for
exactly.
our entire adult lives, some of our children love lives, all that stuff. So
Hmm.
I do understand that it is nice. The community, I think, is crazy. Like how many new people have you met, playing this game that you traveled with, even.
Hmm. Yeah, I met someone, my friend Richard, who I went to Atlanta with, like, and I didn't know him before Lorcana, and he's like a great friend of mine already. So, and I
Yeah,
went to my local game store to buy a box on the first day, and this person was standing there and they were watching me, and I was like buying a lot um, for overpriced.
Yeah, yeah,
And they were like, Who's this buying all these cards?" They just like said that, and I turned around and it was like my friend who I played Yu-Gi-Oh with, who moved to away and then just moved back like a year ago or whatever. At this, and I just moved back home to right like probably like a year before Lorcana. I was living on the West Coast, and like I hadn't seen that friend in forever, and now we hang out all the time again. And I didn't even know they moved back. They like lived in my neighborhood or whatever, and
nice.
they just happened to say something because they saw me buying a bunch of cards, and they thought it might be me, not because they recognized me, but because I was buying a bunch of cards,
Right,
which should
right,
like
right.
tell you like
Yeah,
the kind of reputation or whatever I have for card games like in the area.
I love
But
it.
yeah,
Well, Brian, it has been a wonderful conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining me this evening.
yeah, of
I think
course.
I think there's a lot of good insight there for anyone to really pick up the game and understand that a if we're here to play, we're here to play, and b if it's not what you want to do right now, yeah, go do something else.
Yeah, like there's so many forms of entertainment now, and there's so many even different card games. Like I put DBS, and maybe like I'm not as big of a fan of the Bandai system, but a lot of
Sure.
people are, and it's great. And like if Lorcana is not your thing, like go check that out. If you don't like card games, just go find a video game you like. Like I really, as a League player, I've played like on and off, but I think like the best thing to do is like when you're sitting there and you're like, I hate this game, but then you're also playing it like 6 hours a day. You need to like reevaluate,
Yeah,
like how do I really feel, and like,
yeah,
how is my relationship with this thing, and yeah, I think
yeah. I think the one benefit is that at the very least we only live like in these set frames for 12 weeks. So if you got to take 6 week off, come back in six
yeah,
weeks,
like
set out set
absolutely take a
five. Like it's
break.
not
Like
even that long of a period of time,
it's not,
It's
it's
really
not,
not.
it's not.
So I think a lot to be learned. Again, thank you so much for joining me today, sir. And where can anyone find you if you want to be found?
Yeah, I'm just TH3RAT on pretty much every social platform. So
There you
that's where
go.
you'll find me, and I appreciate you having me on, man.
Thank you guys so much for watching this evening, and we will check you out in the next video. See ya.